part of the decision to create Hummingbird Arts was I wanted to have a career where I could stay home with the family and be flexible. So a lot of that, my son was born in 2009. 2006, I spent time working as a full-time graphic designer and trying to create the business at the same time. So coming home from work, teaching art lessons, doing things like that. I was started my little camp in Hamilton. You can see I have a little white carpet on the floor. I had sort of like caved roofs, and I started teaching art lessons. And I started doing pet portraits. I was practicing getting back into painting because when I was a graphic designer, I worked full time and I didn't work on that. So a lot of this work again is more like copying, technical, realistic. Then I was doing pet portraits. I still love pet portraits. That's still my passion. Again, people give me photos of their pets. I translate it. And the other thing to remember, most of this work is 8 by 10, 11 by 14, so it's mostly smaller work. Almost all oil paint, done in a very tight rendered fashion. I still try to give some life to the pets, but it's still that sort of like that more realistic fashion. 2016, I got tired of being in my little home studio, having students traipse in there, and I was like, well, I need space, or I need to quit and go get a full-time job somewhere. And then so it was go big or home. So I chose the bigger option. I got a little space in Hamilton, and I had this, get myself a new logo, and I had this space in Hamilton for about 4 years. In that space again, I was doing a lot of commercial work, so I was doing logos. I was working with a company that made Halloween costumes, and I was doing projects for their fabrication and stuff for their websites, content creation, things like that. My kids would come home after school, and they would go to the studio and hang out in the studio with their beanbag, their Cheez-Its, whatever, and just hang out with me. So that's sort of the balance. And then I continue with commissions. So you can see, so I did some watercolor. I can't, on the screen looks washed out, that's like for me. But I kept doing commissions. I did some portraits, which I don't like to do. I did a lot of kind of interesting illustrations, house portraits, and then continued with commissions, some logos, and again, all the while teaching. And I didn't find the satisfaction in the commissions as much. I mean, it's great, I created it, but I didn't have a body of work. 2020, COVID, cleared my entire calendar of all the work that I had to do, of all the teaching things that I had to do. And I was homeschooling my kids at the kitchen table. And while I was doing it at the same time, I started taking virtual classes with a friend of mine. And so I started again working on perfecting my drawing skills, because I kept thinking, well, I'm not good enough yet. I want to be able to do that beautiful photorealistic still life, and I want to sell stuff for $10,000, whatever it is. I did this drive to try to figure out what can I do, what can I make. But again, my thought process is, what are other people going to want from me? How can I compete with other artists? Always this idea of wanting to be better, wanting to be up there with other artists. So it was the teacher kind of used that. The teacher becomes a student all over again. I was learning from my friend. So I was working on perfecting portraits, working on this sort of stuff. So that's where I was until about 2021. 2021, I was helped co-found Prince Makes, which artist co-op. I don't know if you've been there, in the Princeton Shopping Center. The funny thing with this was, I was just, I'm impulsive sometimes. So I see something and I'm like, that looks amazing. I'm gonna like try for that. And that's how I find half of the things that I end up doing. So there was a post in, one of my friends posted, you can see here, that they were looking for artists that are interested in some sort of space. So I have in here, it says, Princeton Shopping Center beginning of fall 2021, there'll be a new place in Princeton for artists and crafters to make and sell their works. So I showed up for this meeting, it was on a Saturday in May, and I'm the only person that showed up, other than Jim Levine, who's in charge of it. And I came in and I saw this space, and I was like, I can't envision this space, big empty space. I can't envision where this is going. And so I talked to Jim a little bit. I said, I'm looking for retail space, and Jim was looking for studio space, maker space. And I went home and I forgot about it. I was like, it's too much work. I don't know. He had nothing planned other than this big empty space. So Jim called me about 3 weeks later, and I was like, who is this? And he's like, we're on, we're ready, we're good to go. So he got a couple of the artists together, and we got back together, and we met up, and we talked, and we decided, you know what, we're gonna make this happen. So we put together, I don't know if you know where Bon Appetit is, that used to be in the Princess Shopping Center. They had left during COVID, they closed out and left all their stuff. The entire store was filled, they left everything, cheeses, you name it, they just left it. So the shopping center, said, great, you can bring all their fixtures over from there. So we were raiding their store, we brought everything over, and we created this amazing community of artists. There's about 40 of us, and half of us have space there. And at the beginning, when Chip first said, let's do this, I had a real crisis of conscience, and how much work do I want to put into this? How much of myself do I want to put into this? And I was really like, it's one more thing. It's gonna take away from like other things I'm gonna do. So, but I said, okay, I'm gonna go for this. And it's been one of the best things that I've ever done. We've been there about 4.5 years. We moved one time already within the shopping center. But through Princeton Makes, I have both a studio space and I have a place where I can sell my work, put it up, people see it. But I also have other artists that are all a lot of women, a lot of working artists, a lot of mothers, and a lot of camaraderie and how we balance that. And it really was the start of when I was able to start finding my own voice with art. So it's really important part of my journey. So this goes into finding my voice, right? So up until this point, I'm always like, how can I make a better still life? How can I take a better picture? How can I represent something that's already represented in the world? And so part of it was this I had last year. This is a self-portrait. I tasked myself with like, okay, what's the best way to get to know yourself as artists is self-portrait. And so I decided I wanted to do a self-portrait. And this was in 2020, when I was feeling a little down on the way the world is. So I own I have 2 dogs, but I have an Akita, which are Japanese dogs that are known for, they're loyal. They have a lot of these traits, and so I call this Strength and Grace. And I've started to put parts of me within this, still representational, right, at this point. So I love hummingbirds. My studio is Hummingbird Arts. Lily of the Valley, that's my birth flower, but it also is a flower that does mean peace. There's a lot of meaning behind it. I have the 2 of us in the background. When my grandfather died the morning he passed away, I was in North Carolina driving through the Blue Ridge Mountains, and you can see the fog the way that it settles on the mountains. So it looks like the ocean, but it's really the fog settled on the mountains. So so it's still representational. It's still like, kind of cut and paste a little bit. It tells a story, but it's still like me, my dog in the background. Like, it's still pieced together, but kind of in a cohesive way. So this is my first sort of like, and again, it's still small. It's 11 by 14. So this is my first sort of like going into like, what's important to me? What kind of art do I want? What do I want to show? And I also, so this is where I start to change over a little bit. I've been working with an artist, poet lyricist, and we had a collaboration, Poetry Takes Flight. And up until this point, when I was working with her, a lot of what we would do is she would write a poem about tea, and I would decoupage it in a teapot, or we'd make like certain things that are like, this is a product, you could sell it, It's a very, again, very specific, like, we did that. So we were tasked with, or she asked me to do a piece with her for a online publication where they were looking, and it's Japanese, the theme, the magazine is a Japanese magazine, and they were looking for artists and poets to collaborate together. A visual artist creating a piece of art and a poetry. And so these were featured separately, but she wrote this poem. She talked about it, Kintsugi, and it's about the art. I think they had a workshop on it where if pottery's broken, you mended the pieces with gold. And so I had started to kind of work in paper at this point because I make origami, and so I always kind of have a love for paper. But so this little piece, this piece here, I created again with the idea that her artwork would be featured on it. And again, it's small. It's probably 11 by 14. But we put together, we won on this. We won the prize on this online publication for the collaboration. But to me, this was very rough. But I liked it, the beauty of the paper. It sort of ripped on the edges here a little bit, and I was kind of like experimenting and playing with it. So if you saw the original was done on the back of a sketchboard in my studio, because she was like, we only have like so much time to do this. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna throw some stuff together. And eventually then I was like, oh, now I actually have, I want to mat it. So I sold it. I matted it and framed it, but it was a very sort of this interesting creative process. So with this collaboration, I started to go bigger. I took one of her pieces and I said, instead of like making a poem about tea and putting it in a teapot, I was like, I want to take one of your poems, read this poem. I read it, I was inspired by it, and I wanted to make a piece of artwork in it. So to me, this was the largest it ever worked. To me, this was huge. To me, I'm like, this is the biggest canvas I've ever had. And so what I did in this process, I really liked the poem. I liked the visual imagery of it. It gave me that crossover to, yes, it's a thing, it's a poem, and it has little imagery in there, so as my illustrator mind can get a hold of it. But this was just to do for the sake of doing it, right? So what I did was I put the poem on the canvas in a way, I printed it out on rice paper, I stuck it on, and I'd done that process with the kind of the teapot, so I was familiar with it. And I put it on in a way that kind of gave some flow to the canvas. And then I looked at it this like visual problem solving. So what I wanted to do was, with this poem, she's a lot of the imagery, I am earth, sun, you know, all of that, oceans, mountains, moon, like all of that's in there. And I want to know, how can I go from this warm sun to the idea of the ocean and the stars? So I started with these papers, and I did this over a weekend. And I said, you know what, I'm only going to use what I have in this bag of papers. So we're just gonna pull through. And I used inks to bring some of the oranges and yellows and the blues to sort of blend the paper. But all of it's just layered paper. It's just pieces of paper, and I'm tearing them. And then I love the origami, so I do have the origami elements in here, actually, over here. These are birds that I folded, cut in half, and then attached them to the canvas. And I did 2 other pieces. This was my favorite of the 3 series. But this was, to me, a next level. This was more, instead of creating an item to sell, this is sort of creating this fine art, this response, this emotional response to the poetry that she did. And so this was like a really turning point where I was like experimenting and really enjoying the paper and really getting into it. Then she asked me to create 2 poetry anthologies. And she was like, she wanted me to do the covers of her anthologies. And I'm like, well, this is more abstract. Like, how do I create like a cover to anthology? It's not a specific poem. And the first piece I did, she rejected. She's like, it's beautiful, it's me, but it's not that anthology. So this one here on the right is called Hear Her Voice. And you'll start to see, it could be the profile of a woman. It sort of accidentally happened that way. But you see a lot of flow and a lot of beautiful colors. This one is Earth Claims Her, is the title of the piece. So both these went on the covers. these are small, again, they're small, and these were done in a very short amount of time because they're more expressive. This was like, I'm just gonna start layering, I'm gonna see how it feels, I'm gonna flow with it. There wasn't as much thought. Like the inspiration might come from the color, the earth painter. I was thinking of the earth down here, these sort of trundles and trees, but it could be open to interpretation. So this was my first real starting to understand the abstract art, you know, because before this I was like, I don't know, I mean, I know what makes an abstract piece good when I look at it, I can feel it, I can connect with it, but I didn't have that idea of how do I create that abstract art, how do I tap into myself without trying, because I feel like it has to be something that's gotta have a little free flow to it. So that's sort of, and just a side note, that's what my workshop's gonna be about, is the idea of taking this things that inspire you, poetry, music, and creating a visual response to it. So that's why I started to do that. A couple pieces after this are going to be a little before 2025, but 2025, which is last year, was when I started deciding to build a body of work. Because up to this point, if you were to say, let's have a gallery show, I didn't have anything in my portfolio that I physically had. Everything that I made was sold or done on a commission basis, and that was actually a conscious decision that I had made. I forgot to mention that when I started my business, I was like, I only have so much time, I'm raising my kids and everything, that I don't want to just paint something, put it on a wall and hope it sells. Because to me, so I really decided to step back and just do commission basis, you know, so I was just doing commission work. So for 2025, I said, you know what, I'm gonna start doing shows. I have some time now, my kids are older, I wanna push myself to do that. So, started with an idea and a deadline. So the deadline was last year, in May. Ellerslie had their Ellerslie Open, and they had a deadline of May 16th, or May something. I did not get in, but I decided I was gonna make this piece of artwork, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go big. I'm going to add some paper. I like origami and paper. I'm gonna do what I wanna do. I have somebody who gifted me a big garbage bag full of tree roots, and I said, you know what? I'm just gonna play with this. I'm gonna have fun. So I got a canvas, I painted it black. I covered it in all this paper. So all this is paper. I just painted with the paper, so to speak. And then I made flowers, and I had this idea because I love the shape of the flowers. And then I did something that I think every artist probably panicked. I took a box cutter and cut holes in the canvas and just wrapped. I attached all of these tree branches to the canvas, wired them in on the back of it. Because my biggest fear is that I don't want to have my work up on the wall and something falls off. So I hardwired everything into the canvas, and then these flowers here, the inside of the flowers are parts of a bracelet that I found, and I cut it out and put them in there. The flowers were made of sort of like this, I forget which kind of paper it is, but one of the Japanese papers. And then I just attached everything and I resined it. I took resin with some sheer purple powder there, and I put resin on it to make sure that this work was going to be archival, it was going to last, and it did it big, and it was, for me, the biggest, most expressive thing I ever did. I sent out to Ellerslie, fingers crossed, rejected, and then I was like, okay, what do I do now? A friend of mine was saying, well, it might be because they don't know what to do with it, because it's a crossover between crafts, you know, with the flowers. It's 3D off of the thing. I don't know who the jury was, but anyway, so I was a little disappointed, a little bit defeated, but you know what? I decided, I've had so much fun, I really connected. So in response, I then continued, and this time with intention. So this one on the right was the next piece. That one I was inspired. I was trying to find what can inspire me. So I was like, my grandmother liked calla lilies. I was out in New Mexico and the winter of 2025. So I decided to make the calla lilies. And at this point, I'm not afraid. who am I, like, what's the worst that's gonna happen at this point, you know, I start over. So I found some papers I liked, and I started building these flowers and covering in resin. I had a couple different versions, and then I just started attaching. This one is about, I think, the same size as that one over there. So this is like 36 by 36, and again, all of these are wired into the canvas, making sure that they don't fall. It's a little different. Those are my favorite colors. So these colors are what I would pick, this sort of like this turquoise blue, this dusty red. I sort of like had fun with it, sponged it a little bit. So again, there's no paint on that. The only paint I think is towards the end was I sponged a little bit of texture on with the sponge just to give a little bit of texture on that one so you can see around the edges. There's no paint. What I found to be freeing without the paint is, with the paint, you can always add more and do more detail. And with this, I kind of have to work with what I have. I kind of feel it's a little bit of a different process. Then the one on the left is I love dogwood flowers. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do one that's just a little dogwood branch. That one to me is 12 by 24. And that doesn't really have any particular inspiration other than I like it. So there's these are beads from a bracelet. Again, a lot of what I build, I'm finding stuff that's in my studio or finding paper like this is a boutique paper. So that was really fun. So I was continuing then with this intention and really starting to understand. And finally found real inspiration. And you can see, I think that the pieces have a deeper feeling. This one I actually sold in December, which I was really surprised, because this to me was the first time somebody's ever walked in somewhere and been like, I want that work that you created, not for me, but just whatever. So this one is a bigger piece again. It's 30 by 40. This is called Painted Desert. And then I was laughing because the idea was I was imagining when I was a kid in New Mexico, I had desert paintbrushes, flowers in my backyard that grew with the cacti, and so I was connecting with my childhood or my past, trying to think what things can I pull from, and I was like that. So I had an idea. I was gonna make this whole flowing thing, and then each one of these little flowers took me forever, and I felt so sparse, and then finally I was like, you know what? I'm okay with not having like a whole flowing field. And again, that was sort of the idea of like, how do I utilize this big space that's bigger than me sorting? How do I balance it? And this started to speak to me, and then that's where I started to rip the paper. This one's all paper. I don't think there's any ink on this. This is all paper. So I took that big swatch of pink paper, striped paper, and I put it across the sunset, and then I started building these in. And so to me, it starts looking like little parts of a canyon, and this was the ground and the grass. So I just built it, and it just was letting this piece speak to me into when it was done. So yeah, that's how this sort of started to evolve. And just real quick, I go back, like the name of this piece is Harmony, and the reason it was Harmony is all of a sudden it just was like, it's so harmonious the way it's coming together. So that's why that kind of came to be the title. Then this one I just did, it's called Christine's Garden, and what I was tapping back into is for years I would go into my mother-in-law's garden and see things in her garden, take pictures. Oh, it'd be nice to paint the daisies one day. Oh, then make a nice painting, and nothing ever struck me as the one to do. And so I started playing with the idea of like putting the image on the canvas, covering with the purple paper, and then building with this idea that I was gonna have some 3D elements, some 2D elements, some foreground. These are like little burrs or whatever, I forget what plant they are. And again, all of it's wired into the canvas. So that one is 18 by 36. But that one I really felt this, I have to do this. I felt this like I couldn't finish it, I couldn't rest until it was done, and then it was done. So those are kind of the big sort of happy inspirational pieces. So then the last thing I'm going to share with, and that's some of the pieces here, was this ability, well, it's the giving voice to grief, and it's also the creating work that matters, that has a soul or a feeling to it, and so to tap into myself. So this one is here. This one here, I actually created this in 2022. And I put this towards the end because this was sort of in between like this piece and then that piece. So the reason that this particular piece was my response to the shooting in Texas with Ivaldi, the children in Texas, because I was a teaching artist, so I was at a Catholic school working with kids in 3rd and 4th grade, went home, saw this news about all these kids that had been killed, and I have to go back the next day to a classroom full of kids. And so my big platform in the pandemic is early childhood education and investment in our youth in the country and how I think we're failing our kids. So the idea for this was, it's a bright, happy piece, but if you look, it's the tree hit by lightning and how it's split apart, so you can see images of that. And then there's this sort of rot that comes out in the roots, and it comes up, and then you still have the fruit, but within inside the fruit is that sort of rot that is there because we're not nurturing our soil and our roots for these kids, and it's even more so now. But so that was sort of the idea with this particular piece is my emotional response. So this again was in between this phase where I was trying to get representation, like apple tree, like I was trying to find my voice. So, but that's why. So I particularly like this piece, and actually, it was blue underneath. It was blue, and it had cherry blossom flowers on it. And then I didn't like the feeling of it because to me it was a little bit too pretty and happy. So I wanted to go with the idea of the yellow, like a yellow mist, or I'm not exactly sure, but. And so that's how this piece came about. And again, this was one of the bigger pieces that I worked with. This one was an interesting piece. I just did this in 2025. So I was commissioned to do this for a grieving family who lost their son. It was very traumatic. And when I was contacted, the gentleman had seen some of my newer work on the wall, right, at Princeton Makes. So the gentleman had seen some of my new work with the texture and stuff. So he commissioned me to do a piece that would represent the texture, nature, have a feeling of the sun a piece. And I almost didn't want to take on the commission at first. I said, well, what if I'm dragged into his grief, right? That's the first thing I'm thinking. Second, what if I don't do justice? And third, this is the first time I've been commissioned in this style, and this style to me takes a leap of faith because this is more of that abstract again. The gentleman has an idea of what he wants. I have an idea of what he wants, but there's no specific, this wasn't a picture, like this wasn't like, I mean, it's not as a picture, but there wasn't nothing had been created. So I was tasked with this. So I was able to get some papers, get some ideas, show him, and he loved it. And so this again up here, so these mountains, this is one piece of paper that I cut across. I kind of ripped it a little bit to create that shape. This is a piece of paper that has that natural, beautiful skies already, like it's just marbled. These are like sort of like pine needles that are wired into the canvas, and then resin to kind of preserve. And this water is paper that's been layered in multiple layers. But my inspiration was the paper that you get where it's just rings of blue, and it looks like water. And I said that's the inspiration. That's going to be the pool here, and then my job is to blend this all together. He wanted to have his son in the picture. So I actually took a photo of his son they gave me, changed up the coloring a little bit, printed it on rice paper, and put that right into that collage. So it's collaged in there with everything else. But what I found was, and I think I wrote this here, I was afraid where I'm going to be run into this grief here for this family. What I found this to be very healing in a different way. Because what I was able to do was once I did this, is that I was able to create that I've been wanting to do for a while. And I had an idea in my mind, but I had a photo. And I think 2 years ago. And I tried to paint it in a traditional way. And I had this idea, I want it to look like this and look like this. And I wasn't getting that connection because I felt like it just was not looking I was taking a photo and trying to copy the photo. And so what I found was, is I took a step back and then I said, I like that idea of incorporating wood today. I love this paper. I'm going to work with this. I'm going to create this water. I changed up the composition from the photo. So I changed up the composition a little bit from the photo, so where, like originally, and I was thinking this is the illustrator mind, is like, this is my photo reference, this is my canvas, and my photo reference has to be what goes in the canvas. And then I'm like, no, it's telling a story, I could change it. So I changed a little bit of the photo, and then I was able to create this piece of artwork here, and I loved it, and I really felt, and so actually what I did is instead of it's a celebration piece, is what I call it. So to me, it's not really grieving a loss, but more celebrating a life that he lived. And so this was the first time I gifted prints of this to my family and friends to me, and this is the first time that I've been part of that process, because in the past I've done work for others, and they've gifted it, and they've been met with emotional response, but it's never been the emotional response back. Like, I've never been part of that process. Like, I've been able to create somebody's vision, and they pass it on, and they, grieve or celebrate with their family, but this was the first time that I've been a part of that. And so I was actually honored that I was able to do that. And so that was part of my process with that. Then, just recently, that's this piece here. So this piece was, I attended a friend's memorial service, and I'm not a particularly close friend, an acquaintance, another artist, but when her husband was talking about her at the end, and he was talking about she likes to get stuff on the beach, and they read a poem, and it took me back to parts of my life where I'm living in the West Coast when I was a little kid. And so I just wanted to create that sort of feeling, and I had in my mind kind of the idea of what I wanted to do. So I went and it was big. So it's like, at this point I want to just go as big as possible. And so I kind of created this, and again, this came together really quick. What I had done, and I mentioned this to a couple people, this paper on the top is like, I think it's like a parchment paper. A friend of mine does eco printing, where she prints natural plants and flowers onto scarves and silks. And in the part of the process, she used like parchment in between the layers to kind of absorb all of the material. So you see in here the leaves still in here. And when I wanted to create the idea of this haze, so I had an idea in my mind. So that process was, I'm going to create the hazy late afternoon where the sky leaves in the Oregon coastline. And so I said, let me put this on the canvas, and then I was like, I like this, I love this feeling. It's not traditional blue sky, it's sort of this beautiful hazy sky. And then I kind of went for this ocean. And originally I was like, oh, I'm gonna get out my box cutter again and kind of put like driftwood on it. But when I got to the end, I was like, I don't need to do that, because this to me has this incredible peaceful feeling. It's almost like a Japanese art. I had cut this here to mirror the sort of the reflection of the ocean. And I kind of just let this one really, I felt like this piece really spoke to me as I'm working. I was really feeling this feel of the ocean, feeling where everything could go. I was thinking of tidal pools, so that's where this sort of ocean, the paper had that sort of tidal pool. And then I realized it sort of had the feel of when the ocean goes forward and back, and we use these patterns in the sand. And then down here, it's layered different papers, and this really kind of created that sand feel. So then I just was like, you know what, I'm done with this. I really like it. And the only ink color I used on this one again was I put a little bit of ink here just to give a little bit of color to the sand. But everything else, and then I used a little bit of gold, but everything else was just the paper. And then I just really like this, and so this is where I really feel like I'm starting to connect. And then the last piece, just real quick, I will put on here, is this one here. So this I just started last week as part of my residency. It's called The Stars Are Waiting for Us. And this was done in all paper again. I used a little bit of inks underneath, but this all layered paper. And then I put this sort of lacy paper on top of it. And I had that idea, so what I'm doing, so this is dedicated to my dad, who is suffering from Alzheimer's. So this is it for me to connect. And what I did with this was I had the idea, all of a sudden I'm like, stars, I want to create stars, how am I going to create stars? And then I was in my studio and I saw that paper with the lace, and I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to reverse it, put some colors underneath, and get that feeling of the stars in heaven like you would see out west or somewhere where there's not a lot of lights. Could be a city, could be nothing in the background, you know, with the different colors, but that's where that came from there, you know, with that. So this is just my kind of, how I went from very tight, realistic, to sort of this expressive art, and how I found it along the way. And that's it. So does anybody have any questions?
So we talked a bit about this at your show in Princeton, and first of all, beautiful work. It's really cool seeing the ocean one in person, especially. So how would you say that kind of this release of moving from perfection into releasing and allowing to kind of like the canvas to just kind of do what it needs to do, how has that impacted other parts of your life?
Well, it's interesting, right? I do feel a little bit calmer and an inner calm, in a sense that I'm not striving, I'm not like chasing perfection, right? So now I'm like, you know what, I'm doing this for me, but I'm getting such a beautiful response. A lot of people are seeing the work and the ideas that I may go into sort of this more larger piece. Like I might have some decorative pieces, right, that I would go into like hotels and like lobbies and things like that, because that's what I see. I'm not as afraid, like I said, with these pieces. It's funny, I posted a video on my Facebook, and it was really, I'm Hummingbird Arts, that's my Facebook page, but it showed somebody that was painting for themselves, and they're out there covered in paint, they're dancing, and then they're showing them with the commission in their suit and tie almost, and they're doing this kind of little detail, like stressing out. So I find that there's stress in the commissioned work, but there's joy in there's beauty in the fact that somebody can come in and say, that connects with me. And they buy it because it connects with them, but I also know it came from me, and it's pure for what I want to do. So I think I'm feeling more, when I go to work in the studio, I'm not struggling with what do I do, what do I start. I have a whole like a whole bank now of ideas. Just give me a canvas and I'm gonna just throw it across the wind, and I'm gonna create something. So I find that to be very freeing. I find that I'm able to tackle a lot of things and I think it's just moving into, so paper is, I think, more of my medium now. I'm happy with the medium, and I know I can add stuff to it. So I think that's also finding a medium that I connect with, that allows me to create this work that I think it's new, it's exciting, it's different, nobody else is doing it, it sort of sets me apart, and so I can stop sort of comparing myself to, well, am I as good as that person? Well, I've just found my own voice, this is what I'm going to do, so, yes.
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, I also come from an illustration background. I graduated from SBA in 2004, so it's like a similar time frame where you come out of college and you're like, oh, this illustration's kind of disappeared. You know, and I just felt it was very like restrictive, and I took things like, I was like trying to make it like too literal, you know, and I also had an issue with like creating backgrounds behind pieces, and it seems like you sort of went through something similar there, and I think you've actually come full circle though, because it's kind of like now you're doing these commission works, but you've really like, you know, there's so much more freedom and fluidity in your work, and you found like, you know, with settings to put like people in that, you know, like the commission work with the person who lost their son, like that's kind of technically illustration, but it's just got so much more. It's got like power in it, you know.
Yeah, and that was the idea of finding the right was used to as an illustrator having people be like, oh, you want a pet portrait? Well, do you paint golden retrievers? I don't see any golden retrievers in the $87,000 you painted. Can you paint a golden retriever? So finding those, but finding then the person that sees what I do and has faith in what I do and is understanding of that process, and then we can come to something together to create a more powerful piece. So it almost steps up a level in as an artist in your clientele and your customers, and really going into that world where there's people that are going to understand, maybe have the money to spend on it too. I mean, I hate to say it, it's a business as well. But to really get into that level where, and that you have to trust yourself, right? So when I first started doing artwork, it hurt when you go to a show and you put something out. So I'm like, why is that so, $400? Or have you ever thought about, like that kind of stuff. So at a certain point you have to say, those are not my clients, those are not my customers. I am going to put this out here. I'm going to price it what it's value, what it's fair pricing, and be able to then have those people come to you. And you just have to trust that process. And so that's a lot of that is like figuring out. And I think every artist goes through that too. Undervaluing yourself or doing stuff for cheap. And I did plenty of that, And again, I've done plenty of that. But now, so to your point, is now it's like, this is what I've created. I hope you love it. And that's a freeing feeling.